I'm very interested in history. I've always been, and history becomes the basis of the work that I do. So hence, my interest in FUBA is because I think it was a very important historic moment. And it needs to be appreciated and recorded for that. My own sense of it was that, when change came, FUBA and the organization that I ran subsequently, the Africa Cultural Center, amongst other organizations in the country, weren't accorded its position or their positions in the new society. And it is a sad reflection, an incredibly sad reflection on the fact that we did such valuable work and we were negated, absolutely wiped off the slate, and it's incredible how in place of those, we had white structures coming in. So, it was perplexing to say the least, knowing that we were now having a Black government, who were very much in the know of the liberatory work that we were doing. So that's why I think history is very important. Well, let's go to, the nub of the issue. Right from the beginning, working with FUBA was a very important issue. As I said, we put in a lot of time and effort in meetings, long meetings, all over the place, but in Soweto mainly, where we would be discussing and finding ways in which we could take the structure forward. But, the vision that I took into the project was one of self-development, one of self-realization, and one which was very much tied with the spirit of the 76 uprising. And that is, we needed to do something that was going to stand us in a powerful position as a liberating force. In other words, I think the society was expecting that of us as artists, that whatever we had to put together must be able to take us forward as a people. So when I put together the Soinka Theatre project and the training school, in that whole program, I had put down the rationale for an arts federation. I had placed the principles on which I personally was prepared to go forward, right? And when I started the theater school, I auditioned students, and they came from all over, and it was fantastic. I did those auditions in a little space adjoining the Nunnery Theatre at Wits.
Oh, at Wits.
Yeah. It was made available to us by Robert McLaren, who was a lecturer at the university at that time. And I spent a whole day there auditioning wonderful people, from all over the old Transvaal in those days, and also from other provinces. And out of that, we assembled a fantastic group of people that stayed with the project for many years, actually. So one of the things that I didn't say to you when we were talking about the different streams of work that came with my participation at FUBA was that in 1979, I was working with, believe you me, medical students from Wits University's medical school. And they came to me and said to me, listen, we like to do something, for the work that you guys are doing at FUBA. And we put together with them the first Pan-African Film Festival um, in the South African context, And it was a 1-week program, which we ran at FUBA. It was, not really fully appreciated by the people that were behind us. In other words, those that were in the executive and those that were running the place with me. And that was a sad feature because there was at that time, I think, a certain kind of vision that didn't gel with where I was thinking we ought to be going. So I would say, and I've always been, and I still am, very much an Africanist, in that regard. And when I use the term Africanist, I'm not necessarily talking in terms of a political grouping. I'm talking about my allegiance as a person, so that we don't confuse it. Although there may be some spin-offs from what I am saying. Then, so the Pan-African Film Festival was a very important statement that we were making. And at that time, very little was talked about in terms of, real powerful homegrown Black movies. Everything was run by the white community, and the white film and the white theater movements were very strong influences on everything else that was happening. I think we also need to take into context that when apartheid came into being in the 60s, they set up what they call the Performing Arts Councils throughout the country, which were white monolithic structures that they created. For example, the Civic Theatre, or Johannesburg Theatre today, was set up in 1960 to celebrate the 1961 independence, the Declaration of South African Independence. Those were kinds of events that were really negative in our lives. Yet, those structures were allowed to be. If you look at the structures of PACT, of KPAB, of PACOVs, and all those things, they still exist today in whatever form. But people like myself, with the array of things that I've talked to you about in the last couple of episodes, meant that I was ably placed to be involved in those things. Never had the opportunity, never got an opportunity to work in a South African theatre, except at the Market Theatre in 1976, after I had trained and had been working in South African theatre for over 12 years. So that tells you the kind of climate we were in when we were setting up FUBA, and why there was such an excitement amongst Black people about the success of it, why it ought to be successful. And then during that time, we were, Sipho had assembled some people to assist him in the running of the organization. So he brought together some white folk who became part of the trusteeship of it, or the governorship of it. And, they were good souls. People with the, as they would say, heart in the right place, But my own experience subsequent to that says they may have their hearts in the right place, but they never understood the soul of the search for freedom that Black people were feeling. You know, they could never understand the depth of that. Therefore, they didn't enable us sufficiently to take the high ground. Yeah. So we were, in a sense, drawn backwards because there was the market theater, and that was the one that was getting the funds and what have you. And you must remember, those funds are coming from those agencies that we as Black age groupings would have been going for funds to, like Anglo-American and so on. But our funding became very limited because of that kind of development. Yeah. So during this time, there was one of these trustees that had said there was a whole lot of soapstone sculptures that were available to us, and we could use it to raise money. And these were hundreds of them, hundreds. It took me a whole week or two to go and collect these from Rudaport in a truck and bring them to FUBA every day for that period, and carry them, lug them up 3 floors because we didn't have a lift in that building, sure, you know, in those days. And I used to go out and get a squad of workers, you know, on the street corners, pick them up and take them on every day and carry these really heavy soapstone sculptures. And I put so much effort in that. And I don't know whatever happened to all those things. I don't know, you know, those were works of art from Africa, and we were selling it in order to make art. Mm. You know, I just felt that there was something wrong about this kind of way in which we were expected to raise money. Mm-hmm. So I started negotiations with, when I first got there, and I was working on my own with some funding agencies. And I was able to get a commitment from Stellenbosch Farmers Winery for a festival. I had a vision that we needed to put together a festival of theater from the Black communities throughout the country. Now, this happened in 1972. There was an organization called the South African Black Theatre Union, SAPTU, which was formed in Durban as part of Black consciousness. And it fell apart in this period with the death of Stephen Biko, and before that with the prosecution and the sentencing of the Sasso BPC people who went to Robben Island in 1976, at the end of 1976. So it was my thinking that we needed to resuscitate that. You cannot give the system a chance to think that they have defeated us. So my thoughts, if we can get this money, we put this festival together. So that was the first point of departure that I had with Sipho. And when I told him that they were prepared to give us money to do the festival, he said, but we can't do the festival. We need the money to run the organization. You see? And I said to him, but I negotiated this, and this was the basis of it, that we were going to do a festival. And he said, no, he's going to talk to them and change it so that we can have the money for running the organization. Now, my feeling was that you can do so much more with your trustees and try to get the money to run the organization. If we are going to have a programmatic struggle and a struggle with administration, then we are going to kill ourselves. We're fighting amongst ourselves. And well, he was adamant, and I lost out on that. And we lost out on taking the struggle a step further, you see. So that was a big point of departure for me. Then during that time, we also had the artist from America, from Britain, by the name of Anthony Caro. And like the soapstone sculptures, he made a contribution of art, lots of art, paintings and drawings and so on, to FUBA as a collection, so that it has a collection and it can build around that collection. Now, when the new government came in, FUBA was having many problems. I was not there then, of course. I left much earlier than that. But I heard about FUBA's struggles, and I phoned them and I said, "What's the problem?" And they said, "Well, we are going to have, we owe money for the place that we are staying in, where we are now operating from." It was somewhere in the city, and that they couldn't pay the bills, and that the owner of that was claiming the artworks as payment. I was appalled by this, absolutely appalled.
Sure.
And I wrote to the government, the arts department. Now, this is our arts department, okay, because we have changed now. This is after 94. And I said to them that there's this collection of art that was a collection, a standing collection of FUBA. And I think that the arts department should do something to pay out the guy who's claiming rental, and that we should retain and keep the art collection. And they didn't. They didn't even respond to my thoughts. And I didn't need to do that, but I did that as part of my own conscience. Yeah, because I thought the new government should be much more positive about the work that was being done and the value of what we were doing. So when they said no, what happens? The guy who owns the building takes the art. And FUBA is left poorer. We are all left poorer. Why? Because it would have commemorated a great moment of solidarity shown by a British artist towards the struggle and the efforts of Black people in this country. So I'm just giving you a through line and showing how much I felt about the organization, that I was still prepared to do those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But the
I just want to jump in there, Benjy, sorry. At what point do you think the kind of sort of financial struggles of FUBA came into play until it reached that point? And what do you think kind of contributed
right
to
from
that?
the beginning? Right from the beginning.
Wow. Okay.
When we opened our doors, we knew finance is going to be a problem. Yeah. But what disturbed me is that finance became the basis of a rot within. It shouldn't have been. We should have been strong. We should have been strong. You know, there are many things that I have done over the years that I can't remember being paid for. I told you about my year at Phoenix Players at Dorkey House, and I wasn't paid for it. You know, but I survived on very little. When I worked at the market, the money was so little that it was impossible to live with. You know, I mean, maybe I shouldn't talk about that. I don't want to take us away from where we are. But these are some of the critical issues. The market theater was getting money at that time. FUBA was not. So it was a real battle to keep FUBA going. And, you know, as Sipho got back to the organization and joined me, you know, after he had resigned from his job, his main task was to raise money for the organization. And he was having difficulty, you know. And I can't even tell you if I was paid or how much did I earn. It was very little, if at all. Just kept us going as people, you know. Fortunately for me, I was just a person without children, but I had a wife who was working, and both of us were able to make do, you know. But it was a tough thing for artists. It was a regular thing that artists at that time were always having to find money. Even when I got to Phoenix Players, artists would tell me at the end of the day, hey, have you got some money? I need to go home, you know, and I need to come in tomorrow. So that sort of life was part and parcel of the thinking of that time. And it came from the 50s into the 60s, into the 70s, you know. And so that crisis of not having money and being very shabbily treated by the companies that were around and maybe still around today that didn't pay us money. And maybe we need to do Black Lives Matter kind of action to show these people up, you know, for the fact that they did not help when they needed to. Today we have it in our hands. We have it in our hands because, you know, we are now an so-called free society, you know. But the main issue, you know, with me and with FUBA runs around a much more critical matter. It wasn't a money issue. It was an issue of principle. And that principle was set out, as I said, in the theater document, which Sipho was very impressed with, and on which basis he had invited me to join and become, you know, part of the structure of the organization, not just part of the group that was talking about it, you know. And one of those ideas was that whatever we do had to be homegrown. We had to stand up and say that we have in this country many Black people who can become part of the program to accredit students for the work that we were doing, and that we were designing curriculum in the visual arts, in the theater, in dance, in music, and so on. And I felt that it was a very important thing that we award our own diplomas and have a standards base, an accreditation standard base that we need to set up. But during this time, Sipho was also, when he got in, linking up with the Johannesburg Art Foundation, with Bill Ainsley, and with people like Bess Finney, who was an actress and who was part of the founding structure for Workshop 71 at that time, which was run by Rob McLaren and Bess Finney, you know. And these folk were starting to influence the directions in which FUBA was going, and which the way in which Sipho was driving it. So already in the management committee, which was a Black structure, there was support for my thinking. And Sipho was linking with his board and was having a different kind of thought process. So he allowed people like Bess Finney to influence his thinking to the point that she wanted us to work with the Trinity College in Ireland as the accreditation organization. Now, this is what was happening throughout the colonial world, all the countries in Asia and in Africa, and maybe elsewhere, that were coming out of struggles and were involved in struggles, were being accredited educationally through places like the Trinity College. And they would have licentiate programs, teachers training, and all sorts of things. But, you know, what I failed to make Sipho and others understand is that this was another way in which They were feathering the nest of colonialism because our minds were being infected. We could have started much earlier to free ourselves of those things. And it's important to free ourselves. Of course, for me, I was very strong because Black consciousness helped me to free myself. And I was in that process. Whereas, as I said, in my early discussion with you, that Sipho and the older generation were very much touched by what happened in the 50s and the 60s. We were the breakaways from the mid-60s. We were the breakaways. So Sipho was still tied up with the idea of that period, that we were reliant on white folk to help us. FUBA itself, the Federated Union of Black Arts, ought to have been an organization that was national. Because if it was a federation, it meant that it was going to link up with arts organizations all over the place in the country. He never worked towards that end. And that to me was a big disappointment. There was an opportunity for us to take our work to the other provinces and to set up provincial units, that were part of the federation that we were setting up, the Federated Union of Black Arts. So that was the second issue. So the first one was the one that really riled me, because it was going against the grain of principle. A principle, firstly, that we should be aligned to the continent. I was very much influenced in my thinking, and I still remained like that when I started up my organization, of the African Cultural Charter, which was set up in Algeria in 1969, in which it set out quite clearly the role and direction of the arts in Africa as an anti-colonialist movement. We need to work towards releasing our people from it. And so these things were left hanging, and I couldn't convince Sipho. I had many meetings with him, and eventually I had one-on-one meetings even with Dr. Motlana, and a meeting with Sipho, myself, and Dr. Motlana on the issue, at which meeting, Sipho was adamant that we should follow the Trinity College program because it's already there. And I said, no, it doesn't mean that it's ready, that we should just fall in line. We are in a liberation process, and we should use this moment to advance our thinking. And well, I resigned at that meeting in 1980. And I said, if we can't do this, then I have to resign. I cannot be part of this, because I will then take my thoughts and ideas and place it in another structure, And well, I think Sipho was not happy about the fact. I wasn't happy about doing that, but I thought I would turn his way in dealing with things, and that he would perhaps reconsider. But he didn't. And so I had sadly to leave in 1980. And when I told my students at the time, they refused to let me go. And I said, well, if Sipho doesn't want me, what must I do? So what they did was they went on their own and had a meeting with him, and said to him that we want Ben to be here, and we want the school to go on. And even the teachers in music, and especially in the visual arts, were also very supportive. So there was a moment of explosion within FUBA, that certain things are taking place, and they weren't happy about me leaving. And I eventually said to them that, maybe it's for the best, because if I stay, I'm not going to feel at ease. And I don't think that I would be able to pursue the path and the principles that I had set out for myself. And I spoke to the students, and the students said, well, if you go, we are going. And that was the big moment. And I reluctantly said, yes, I will go, and I will set up whatever I'm going to have to set up, because I have to move on with my life. And they said to me, but you have to take us with. And I said, guys, you are putting another, albatross around me. How am I going to deal with all of you, with all your problems and stresses and so on? And how are we going to do it without the means? And they said, let's do it. And that was the basis on which I set up a school called Action Center, which I started in 1980 as a basis to accommodate the students. And that gave me the launch pad to build the Africa Cultural Center, which I ran right up till 2010. Yeah, I thought that we might have been able to conquer, and that when the new society would come, that they would respect what we did. But we were not. I mean, in the 15 years from 1994 to 2010, the system did everything they could to break us. And to me, it is one of the most horrific experiences that nobody wanted to listen to, that they brought a cultural organization, which for my organization was the largest Black intervention in the country. It was the only intervention that was building a structure. You know, we were building a center. We had invested quite a lot of money already. And they did everything in their power to destroy it. But that's another story. And that's what I'm writing as my history. And what I'm doing in conversation and in academic study, you know. But that is where the FUBA story fell. But while I was with my own structure, the Africa Cultural Center, I was just a few doors away from FUBA. I was in Pym Street, number 66. And Sipho and I got on right till his death. We got on very well. We never had bad blood because of what happened. I was still invited to some of the end of year events that were happening at FUBA. And I used to go to them. I remember the one in Soweto, which was run by James Mtoba. James Mtoba was part of Workshop 71. And he came down to join FUBA when I left. So that's what happened then. But in 1984, in that area, just the street from where the market was and where FUBA is, from that corner, Walhuta Street, Pym Street, going up to Becker Street and Bree Street. You can look at it in the map and you'll see there's a block there. Mm-hmm. And I led an initiative. I was always very keen. To develop something that would be very hard for the system to break down. And I felt that we needed to build our facilities. I very strongly believed that as a director, I needed a rehearsal room in which to function. An artist needs a studio. Mm-hmm. A musician needs a space where he can play his music. You know, we cannot be expected to be running around and not having places in which to work. Mm. You know, we need to honor the work of the artist. So I wanted these spaces. So I started a program of joining in with several other organizations, including a SACHEAD, which was an educational unit run by John Samuels. And we put together a trust for the development of that area. And FUBA was my first stop. I spoke to Sipho and asked him to join. And I don't know how they took the decision, but he didn't come in. And I felt that he ought to have come in, simply because together we were much more solid and stronger. But if we remained apart, this is what the system would work to undo, you know. And that principle, again, the principle of solidarity was one of the weak points of that moment in the arts. And I think it remained and is still there at this point, this lack of solidarity amongst Black artists. And you might say, well, you know, in a new society, why are we talking about Black artists? Because we had a lot to catch up on. We haven't caught up at all. Yeah. We haven't caught up at all because the new system has not given, firstly, it didn't recognize us. You see, if it recognized this, FUBA wouldn't have had the problems that it had, you know, and FUBA would not have gone in the journey that it went. The narrative that FUBA followed was a sad narrative, a very sad narrative. And it was self-imploding as it was going, you know. And, you know, Sipho did see me, you know, about the things that I was doing. And, you know, he didn't think that it might be a good idea for him to join. Now, when I set up my center, I set it up not as a personal project, but as a project for the country. And I was developing the facilities with the hope that FUBA and other organizations would be part of it. I was single-minded about setting it up. And I felt that if, you know, I had to get back into an organization like FUBA, we might just be falling apart, you know. So sadly, that whole effort that we were involved in from 1977 to the present time has come to naught in terms of the fact that we weren't able to build those values, firstly, and those structures, secondly, and thirdly, and most importantly, the talents that came out of there. There were many powerful talents that grew out of this, you know. And for me, it is a sad, sad, sad reflection of the state of the arts in present day South Africa.
Yeah.